Hi everyone, I'm here. And today I thought I would talk about cold weather photography, because I'm often asked what I do when I take my camera out in the freezing cold. So today I'll share some tips that might help you take amazing photos in any cold weather that you have. So when it comes to taking photos in the cold, there are 4 things you should always be thinking about. Number 1 is making sure you look after your camera gear and batteries. Number 2 is how to take great crisp pictures. Number 3 is what kind of settings to use, and number 4 is what to photograph. So let's start first with number 1, looking after your camera gear and batteries. So this one is very important. If you don't look after your gear and batteries, then you might not get the shots that you want. First of all, I always use a camera bag that is insulated. Think of a camera bag like a jacket for your camera. You wouldn't leave your camera outside without a jacket, so don't leave it in a non-insulated camera bag. It's also really important to make sure that you keep your batteries nice and warm. Cold batteries don't hold a charge very well, so you want to keep them warm. What I like to do is keep my batteries in my pocket, or in the inside of my jacket where it's nice and toasty. Also, sometimes, if it's really cold, I actually bring an old battery charger that I plug into the wall and I can just pop my batteries in there. That way they're nice and warm before I put them into my camera. Another thing that I recommend is bringing an extra set of batteries. Even if you have batteries that are rechargeable, because if you run out of battery in the middle of your shoot and you can't recharge them because it's too cold, you'll be in trouble. So always bring an extra set of batteries. One last thing that I recommend doing is using a lens that has a built-in lens hood. Some lenses, especially wide-angle lenses, have a plastic lens hood built into the front of them. And that's great because if it's snowing or there's lots of moisture around, that lens hood will block the moisture from getting onto your lens. I have a photo of my husband where he was shooting with a 16mm full-frame lens and he didn't have a lens hood and it snowed and we couldn't get the snow off the lens. So it ended up being a bit of a blurry lens. So that's something that you don't want to happen. Number 2 is taking great crisp pictures. This is probably the most common question I get asked about cold weather photography. How do you get such crisp images in the cold? Well, there's 2 reasons why you can get great crisp images in the cold. The first one is you can use a fast shutter speed. A fast shutter speed means that you can still get enough motion blur in your water, in your trees, or whatever you're photographing so that it looks natural. But the second reason is that the cold causes the air to become very clear and crisp. In fact, the colder it gets, the crisper the air becomes. When the air is cold, the air molecules stop moving around as much and they're more still, which means that light travels through the air very easily and clearly. So the colder it gets, the better your images will look. The only time that this doesn't apply is if there's moisture in the air. If there's lots of moisture in the air, then the moisture is going to stick to those air molecules, and that's going to cause diffusion in your images. And so that's when you get that soft look. So if you want sharp images, avoid shooting in the fog or in heavy snow, because that will diffuse your images. Number 3 is what kind of settings to use. There are 2 things that you really need to watch out for when it comes to settings. The first one is that you want to make sure that you're shooting in manual mode so that your ISO stays low. If your ISO starts creeping up, then your images are going to end up with a lot of noise in them, so you want to keep your ISO low. To keep your ISO low, you're gonna have to have a faster shutter anyways, because if it's really bright out, then you're gonna need a faster shutter anyways. And then that means you're gonna need a smaller aperture. So that means you're going to have to lower your f-stop number. So you're going to go down to like f8 or f11. That's totally fine. Your depth of field isn't going to change that much. But the most important thing is that your ISO stays low. Now, if it's overcast, then you're going to need to lower your shutter speed anyways because it's not as bright. So you're going to need a slower shutter anyways. And then you're going to need to raise your ISO just a little bit to compensate. But if you really want your images to be crisp, try and keep your ISO as low as possible. I don't mind having a little bit of motion blur in my images, so I will lower my shutter speed down to 1/30th of a second or 1/20th of a second to allow more light in, which means my ISO stays nice and low. And that's totally fine with me, because I like a little bit of motion blur in my images. The fourth thing is what to photograph. I know that this seems like a funny question, but I get asked this all the time. Like, what do you actually photograph when you go out in the cold? Well, anything that you like. Just because it's winter doesn't mean that you can't photograph birds or flowers or wildlife or plants or anything like that. But there are some things that look really great in the wintertime and you definitely should be looking for those. Number 1. of course, is snow. Snow reflects light, so it makes everything look beautiful. Look for patterns in the snow. Look for textures in the snow. Also look for reflections in the snow. Reflections are a great way to get really cool effects in your images. And in the wintertime, there's lots of reflective surfaces because there's lots of ice around. Also, the winter is a great time to photograph architecture, because in the summer, we have leaves on our trees and that kind of hides buildings. So in the winter, I love taking photos of brick walls, of roofs, of doors, of windowsills. I just love seeing all of the different architectural features that you can't see in the summertime. The winter is also a great time to photograph plants and branches because in the summertime, the plants have leaves on them, and they kind of hide the shape of the plant. But in the wintertime, you can really see the shape of the plant and of branches and bare trees. So that's something that I really love photographing. And of course, if you have lakes that freeze over in your area, they look absolutely beautiful in the wintertime. Look for patterns in the ice. Look for cracks in the ice. Ice can be really dangerous to walk on, so please be careful when you're out there. But ice can make for some really interesting images. Now, I live in an area where there's lots of frozen lakes, so I'm really lucky in that way. So those are my tips for photographing in the cold. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other tips and let me know what you're photographing in the cold and how you're doing it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're inspired to get out there and take some amazing winter photos. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.